Years ago, more than 200 armed men crossed the seas from the Sulu archipelago in the Philippines to Sabah, Malaysia.
Saya punya istri pun tanyalah, kenapa lari dari sana dong? Bahwa penceroboh sudah ada di sana.
This would spark a month-long conflict that quickly turned deadly.
Lahat-lahat mga 60 plus ang namatay sa amin.
How did the decade-old Lahad Datu-standoff lead to a court case worth $15 billion?
And that ito na yung kabayaran sa lahat ng injustices na tiniis ng people of Sulu.
His appointment has been found to be null and void, and so that the arbitration award should not be executed.
And what tensions remain over the territorial claims of Sabah?
Dia baru macam semalam yang berlaku, kan? Sudah 10 tahun. Dan kesan dia tu masih kita boleh lihat.
Lalaban din kami uli. Hanggang mabalik sa amin yung lugar ng Sabah.
In February of 2013, Muhammad Azroy, a resident of Sabah, received an unusual call from the police.
Pada 2013, saya adalah penyelia perubatan di Sri Sempurna Unit 2 Paskal. Bila kejadian tersebut, pihak barisan hadapan memerlukan anggota yang serba sedikit tahu tentang geografi dan jalan-jalan masuk di kawasan Felda Sahabat.
Felda Sahabat is a plantation area administered by the Federal Land Development Authority of Malaysia in the Lahad Datu district of Sabah. Sabah is the country's easternmost state. When Muhammad Azroy arrived on the ground, the usual laid-back atmosphere of rural Sabah was absent.
Pada masa itu, setelah saya sampai di tempat operasi, keadaan agak tegang sebab kita masyarakat awam bercerita tentang desas-desus akan terjadinya kemungkinan perang ataupun pertumpahan darah disebabkan di Saki penceroboh yang masuk ini adalah penceroboh yang bersenjata.
The intruders were followers of the self-proclaimed Sultan of Sulu, Jamalu Kiram III. They had sailed from the island of Tawi-Tawi in the Philippines to Sabah. By February 11, 2013, about 100 armed men had infiltrated the small village of Kampung Tandur near the town of Lahad Datu. More would join them in the coming days.
Di samping sekarang kita betul-betul berhadapan dengan negara jiran, yaitu Kepulauan Filipina. Memang berada di hadapan kita, mengikut pengalaman orang-orang kampung di sini, hanya mengambil masa 1,5 jam hingga 3 jam untuk sampai ke pulau-pulau tersebut. Jadi ia sangat menyukarkan pihak keselamatan untuk mengawal kedatangan dan kepergian mereka.
To the Malaysian authorities, this was an invasion by foreign forces. The police and military were quickly mobilized to the area. Roadblocks were established around Kampung Tandur, while Coast Guard vessels patrolled offshore. During this time, Sabah State Assemblyman Asafal Alian was living in a nearby village.
Sebenarnya pada masa itu saya memang tinggal di Tanjung Lebihan bersama dengan penduduk kampung, dan pada masa itu saya dianggap sebagai ketua masyarakat, community leader di tempat itu. Jadi kita jalani kehidupan kita seperti biasa, pergi ke laut, pergi ke kebun, apa semua, mencari kehidupan. Saya memang ada mengarahkan kita punya belia-belia untuk membuat pemantauan dan juga kawalan keselamatan sempadan antara Tanjung Batu dan juga Tanduau. untuk memerhatikan pergerakan jika ada.
Dr. Vilashini Somia is an anthropologist at the University of Malaya. Back in February 2013, she happened to be in the Lahad Datu region, working on a student film with some classmates.
On the day the Royal Sulu Army had arrived at Kampung Tanduo, there was nothing on the news. It was complete silence, and none of the restaurants were open. Everybody was closing shop at like 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. I had no idea what was going on. And so in asking, the only response we got was, run. You know, don't hang around town. Something's going to happen. I have to admit that sort of spooked us. One or two finally sort of took the time to explain what they had heard, which is a war was coming, right?
The Malaysian authorities gave the Filipinos an extended deadline of February 26 to withdraw. As the day approached, then Filipino President Benigno Aquino urged Jamalu Kiram to pull his followers back.
This is my appeal to you. These are your people, and it behooves you to recall them. It must be clear to you that this small group of people will not succeed in addressing your grievances, and that there is no way that force can achieve your aims.
But the Sulu forces did not relent. To add to the already tense situation, there were reports that the invaders had escaped the cordon under cover of the difficult terrain.
Dulunya memang hutan tebal, kawasan balak. Tetapi bila Perda masuk kawasan tersebut dan telah ditanam sawit. Dalam masa yang sama, keadaan di sini yang banyak ditumbuhi pokok paya bakau. Di samping mempunyai pantai yang panjang. Jadi ia memang mencabarlah bagi mana-mana pegawai keselamatan khasnya untuk mewujudkan satu sistem keselamatan di sini.
Up to this point, the standoff had been non-violent, but this would change on March 1st. A shootout erupted between the Sultanate forces and Malaysian police at Kampung Tanduo. The confrontation left 2 police and 12 Sultanate men dead. In the aftermath, villagers in the area were ordered to evacuate.
Penduduk kampung Tanjung Batu dia sudah mulai ada yang melarikan diri. So saya punya istri pun tanya lah kenapa lari dari sana dong. Bahwa penceroboh sudah ada di sana.
Apabila kita ketahui benda itu sudah berlaku, saya terpaksa mengeluarkan penduduk kampung menggunakan kenderaan sendiri, lori dan apa saja untuk membawa mereka keluar. Dan perkara yang paling saya tidak lupa ialah di mana sebenarnya ada seorang ibu yang baru bersalin, kan? Baru saja bersalin, baru 1 jam 2 jam gitu, yang terpaksa saya pindahkan ke kawasan yang lebih selamat.
The villagers were evacuated to sites around Felda Sahabad, seeking shelter in community centres like the Embara Budi Hall.
Bila kami sampai Dewan Embara Budi, penduduk kampung melebihi 1.000 orang, 1.600 orang. Jadi Embara Budi pun tidak boleh menampung. So dia bilang kamu cari kamu punya keluarga yang terdekat untuk boleh tinggal lah.
Meanwhile, the fighting between Malaysian forces and the Sulu men intensified, spilling beyond the confines of Kampung Tanduo.
Beberapa buah jet pejuang daripada angkatan tentera Malaysia menggugurkan beberapa buah bom di kawasan kejadian dan juga disusuli dengan tindakan melepaskan mortar yang berterusan sehingga beberapa jam, dan kita sendiri boleh dengar kejadian begitu jelas sekali dengan kita dengar dan kita boleh lihat itu kita punya jet pejuang menggugurkan bom. Keadaan tu memang orang kampung memang ketakutan lah. Sebab benda ni tidak pernah berlaku. Sebelum ini kita hidup aman, damai, hidup seperti orang kampung biasa.
The Malaysian offensive was given the name Operation Daulat or Operation Sovereignty. It is estimated that around 6,500 personnel were deployed on the Malaysian side. Meanwhile, more men had arrived from Sulu, bolstering the Filipino numbers to 235. By March 11th, the Malaysians beat back intruders and secured the village of Tanduo. The fighting petered out over the next couple of weeks, and standoff was officially over on the 24th, after the remnant Sulu fighters escaped. In total, the conflict claimed 71 lives, 56 followers of the Sultanate, 9 Malaysian security personnel, and 6 civilians. Around 150 Sulu combatants were also captured. The conflict, which came to be known as the Lahad Datu-standoff, was one of the deadliest attacks on Malaysian soil in decades. As villagers returned to their homes, they began to take stock of the damage.
Majoriti ya untuk penduduk kampung Tanjung Labian ni dia bekerja sebagai pekebun dan juga nelayan. Jadi masa pencerobohan tu dia genap 1 bulan. Bila genap 1 bulan pokok kelapa sawit tidak dituai kan. Jadi dia punya buah pun sudah buruk apa semua. Jadi sumber pendapatan pun tidak ada. Sama juga yang pergi laut tidak boleh kan. Jadi penduduk kampung terjejas lah akibat pencerobohan tu.
Macam masjid apa semua tu ditembak semua tu kan. Kedai-kedai di Ceroboh ada.
Masa pencerobohan tu ada 5 tiang yang daripada kampung Tanjung Batu hingga Tanjung Labian ada 5 tiang lampu yang jatuhlah akibat pencerobohan tu. Ini adalah bekas-bekas dia.
Apa you punya perasaan bila you nampak macam ni?
Masih trauma tu masih ada lah sebab nampak kan bekas dia.
Depan rumah sendiri?
Ya, depan rumah sendiri.
10 years have passed since the deadly Lahad Datu-standoff, and the impact lingers in this part of Malaysia.
Ada dia punya advisory travel yang dikeluarkan oleh beberapa buah negara di mana Sabah ini, terutamanya pantai timur Sabah, sebagai kawasan yang tidak selamat untuk dilawati. Ada beberapa keadaan di mana pelabur kurang yakin untuk datang melabur ke Sabah, terutamanya di kawasan pantai timur.
Kerisauan tu ada, tetapi itulah kita hanya berserah kepada pihak kerajaan. Memang kerisauan ada, sentiasa ni sebab kita ni sempadan dekat dengan negara jiran, memang dekat. Anytime, 1 jam boleh sampai dengan speedboat sampai. Tetapi pasukan keselamatan kita yakinlah sebab kawalan cukup ketat lah. Berbanding dengan sebelum ini, sebab aman, kuranglah sikit macam misalnya ada pos PJA jauh-jauh. Tapi sekarang di mana-mana pasukan keselamatan cukup.
But with 1,400 kilometers of coastline to cover, some feel that security is still inadequate. Since 2013, there have been numerous kidnappings off the coast of Sabah, mainly by the Abu Sayyaf militant group from southern Philippines. In 2021, there were unfounded rumors of a plot to invade Sabah again, this time with 600 Sulu militiamen.
Dan menjadi tanggungjawab kerajaan persekutuan untuk menjamin keselamatan negeri Sabah. Namun pada saat dan ketika ini saya boleh lihat bahawa ada kelonggaran dalam perkara tersebut. Sebagai contoh, kenapa base tentera yang terbesar di negeri Sabah diletakkan di Langkawi, sedangkan sepatutnya diletakkan di pantai timur Sabah.
But why did the forces from the Sulu Sultanate make that fateful boat ride to Sabah in February of 2013? Alexander Nasta Tauloa lives in Sulu on the southern western tip of the Philippines. He makes a living as a security guard. but he has another role in his community. Alexander counts himself a commander among the Royal Security Force of Sulu, a loose cadre of the volunteer militia.
Nagtitraining kami para ma-defend namin yung Sultanate of Sulu. Yun lang ang ano namin sa Royal Security Forces.
10 years ago, he was among the initial 100-strong Royal Security Force that travelled to Sabah. They were led by the Raja Muda, or Crown Prince, the brother of the self-proclaimed Sultan of Sulu at that time. What followed was a month-long confrontation with Malaysian forces, known as the Lahad Datu-standoff.
Bumiyahe kami mula sa Simunol Tawi-Tawi papunta sa Lahad Datu-standoff, Sabah, Malaysia. Sakay namin isang barko at saka 4 na jungkong. Yun ang sinakyan namin. Nakarating kami doon alas 10 ng gabi. Yung dala-dala namin, first dala-dala namin, pagkain, uniforme namin, itak, yun lang. May baril. Yung baril, ilan lang yung baril. Kasi hindi layunin namin pumunta doon na manggera. Ang layunin namin pumunta doon, bumalik na kami sa aming lugar.
While the Malaysian authorities saw the arrivals as an invasion force, Alexander and his compatriots had a different view. To them, Sabah belonged to them and the Sultanate, a ruling dynasty with a history going back to the 1400s.
The story of the Sultanate dates back long time ago, hundreds of centuries ago. Wala pang Pilipinas. Meron ng Sultanato ng Sulu.
Suluk means sea current, and the people of Sulu were known as the Tausuk, or people of the sea current. The Sulu Sultanate once laid claim over the Sulu archipelago, which stretches from the tip of Mindanao to eastern Sabah in Borneo.
North Borneo originally belonged to the Brunei Sultanate, but as a result of settling a feud amongst the members of the Brunei Sultanate, the Sulu Sultan was gifted parts of North Borneo by the Brunei Sultan. Now, even though it was gifted to the Sulu Sultanate, somewhere in the 1860s, the Brunei Sultan decided that he was going to lease parts of North Borneo, or all of North Borneo, to several colonial owners.
In an 1878 agreement, Sabah was leased to Baron von Overbeck and Alfred Dent, who later founded the British North Borneo Company.
And there was compensation to be paid of $5,000 per annum. That was increased in 1903 to 5,300. Then when North Borneo, that territory, became property of the British, and then Malaysia was formed in 1963, Malaysia continued to make those payments.
At the heart of the dispute was the word pajakan, written here in the Jawi script. In the British version of the agreement, it was translated as to grant and cede. In Malay, however, pajakan can mean to lease or to rent. An updated 1903 agreement used the word menyerahkan instead, meaning surrendered. Nonetheless, the Sultan's heirs insisted that the British, and subsequently Malaysia, were merely renting Sabah from them, its rightful owners. But by the time of Malaysia's independence, Sulu had become part of the Philippines and was under the jurisdiction of the federal government.
In 1962, Sultan Ismail Kiram, the grandfather of the present Sultan, Sultan Muizuddin, asked the Philippine government to sort of take charge in terms of doing the claim on behalf of the Sulu Sultanate to Malaysia.
The government of the Philippines initially pressed the Sultan's claims. In the late 60s, former President Ferdinand Marcos was alleged to have authorized Operation Merdeka, a failed plan to destabilize Sabah. Meanwhile, an official document from 1968 asserted that the Republic of the Philippines has dominion and sovereignty over Sabah.
So that created some kind of irritants or tension between Malaysia and the Philippines. By mid-70s, however, that dynamics changed because Marcos decided to drop the Sabah claim. That was also the period when there was a kind of a rapprochement in Philippine-Malaysia relation. In that context, the Sabah claim was put into the back burner. And this was not in the interest of, obviously, the Sulu Sultanate.
The heirs of the Sultanate of Sulu surrendered their sovereignty over Sabah to the Philippine government. And it's a duty and moral obligation of the government to pursue this claim of their citizens.
From the 70s to the Lahad Datu-standoff in 2013, Malaysia's economy grew steadily, driven in part by the oil and gas deposits off the coast of Borneo. Meanwhile, Sulu languished. In 2022, it was the poorest province in the Philippines, with poverty rates reaching around 70%. This was due in part to underdevelopment and violence caused by Islamic separatists and militant groups like the Abu Sayyaf.
When people learn that I'm a Tausug, that I'm from Sulu, ang alam lang nila about Sulu is the Abu Sayyaf, the kidnappings, beheadings, bombings. We're not like that.
Since the death of Sultan Muhammad Abdullah Kiram in 1986, there has been no officially recognized sultan. There are several claimants to the throne, and the Kiram family is widely regarded as rightful heirs. Princess Jasel is the spokesperson for the family. She's the daughter of Jamalu Kiram III, the self-proclaimed sultan during the Lahad Datu-standoff. She understood why her kinfolk sailed to Sabah 10 years ago.
Out of frustration, the people just want to go there and experience living in their own territory because they got frustrated already na parang wala nang pag-asa that we can live in our own territory in our lifetime.
Her uncle, Datu Alinapia Kiram, agrees. He is the Defense Secretary of the Royal Security Forces.
Bene, nagplano kami halan sin hula kapatut na mo. Di na kami inuinon sin parinta Pilipinas, iwan sin parinta Malaysia. So pagkain tumpukan sin arisip masigpit in kabuyanan, amoy atin nagplano kami madto pahula Sabah maglag kabuyanan mag-uma.
So, in crossing the seas to Sabah, the Sultan's men had not considered themselves the aggressors.
Yung layunin namin papunta doon, uuwi na kami sa aming sariling lugar. Hindi kami manggulo doon kasi alam naman namin sa amin yung Sabah. Uuwi kami doon, maghanap buhay kasi mahirap lang kami mga security forces. Baka doon mahaon yung buhay namin. Yun pala hindi. Inano kami, nambus kami ng Malaysian forces. Sila ang nag-umpisa.
The Malaysian authorities have maintained that the Filipinos fired the first shot on that fateful March day 10 years ago. Alexander tells a different story.
Kumuha yung 5 kasama namin doon sa kabila ng generator. Pagkatapos inambus nila, namatayan kami ng isa. Yung kinakausap namin, yung chief ng pulis, yung commissioner yata ng pulis, si George Kipley, yun ang kinausap namin. Hindi pa natapos. Bakit yung armed forces ng Malaysia nandun na nangambus sa amin? Sa doon nagkagulo.
Alexander even claims that the Malaysian forces were responsible for the destruction of the villages in Lahad Datu.
Paano kayo makasunog? May sikatona sila, may tangke sila. Kami wala. Sila ang nagsunog lahat. So, ngayon, inanuhan niya, kami daw ang nanunog. Hindi kami manununog ng bahay ng tao. Kasi yung civilian doon, parehas lang sa amin, Muslim.
As the fighting raged in Lahad Datu, 1,000 kilometers away in the Philippine capital of Manila, protesters descended on the Malaysian embassy. There were calls for the Aquino administration to support the Sultanate and reassert the Philippines' territorial claims.
The sultans still are revered by the people. They continuously extend or give their respect in reverence to the sultanate, including their relatives, because they still have a position of influence in the area.
I think a lot of people sort of don't understand that every time there is a major sort of political event, elections for example, right? If we looked at from Duterte to Marcos in recent times, the mention of reclaiming North Borneo or parts of Sabah back has always been mentioned, right? It is in the interest of the Philippines government to sort of remind Malaysia and other members of the region that historically Sabah belonged to the Philippines, right? And this reminder is important, particularly for, I think, voters in the southernest part of the Philippines.
When the Lahad Datu-standoff ended, Alexander escaped back to Tawi-Tawi on a small rowboat. He had survived, but the humiliation was a bitter pill to swallow.
Lahat-lahat, mga 60 plus ang namatay sa amin. Walang hustisya. Kaya nga, nandito kami, nag-ano sa Sultan of Sulu, sila ang bahala. Lugar ang pinag-usapan, lugar ng kanunuan. Pahiya tayo, lugar natin. Pagkatapos ibang yun ang sa amin.
But the Lahad Datu-standoff would set off a chain of events that led to a multi-year court case and a $15 billion award. In the aftermath of the Lahad Datu-standoff, Malaysia would end an agreement which had stood for over 100 years. Former Prime Minister Najib Razak halted the yearly payment of 5,300 ringgit to the Sulu Sultanate for the lease of Sabah.
Anecdotal evidence suggests that it was because Malaysia thought that the Sulu Sultanate was involved in the Lahad Datu invasion, and therefore the payments were stopped. Then the Sulu Sultanate took the case up to arbitration and filed a claim in the Spanish court to ask that a Spanish arbitrator hear the matter for payments that were not paid to be paid.
In 2017, a group claiming to be the heirs of the Sulu Sultanate filed their grievances in Madrid, Spain. An arbitrator, Gonzalo Stampa, eventually took on the case in May of 2019. It was a controversial appointment.
And then, because of the Spanish Superior Court decision that the arbitrator was not properly appointed, the Sulu Sultanate moved their claim to the French jurisdiction and attempted to have arbitration with the same arbitrator, and then again the French Superior Court found that the French arbitration was null and void. Yet the same Spanish arbitrator in France continued with the arbitration, and in February 2022 awarded USD 15 billion against Malaysia. So the Spanish arbitrator Stampa says that because Malaysia stopped payment of the $5,300, Malaysia ought to give back Sabah because the so-called lease had ended, and because Malaysia can no longer give back Sabah because Sabah is already part of Malaysia. The arbitrator said you need to give the equivalent value of what Sabah is today. So that includes, there was a valuation report, and that includes oil and gas development rights, what Sabah has been benefiting from in terms of natural resources. And there is a value that has been placed by an expert report purportedly of 15 billion USD.
The French arbitration court ruled in favor of the Sultanate of Sulu. Somehow, ang sarap huminga. Ang sarap. Parang it's a relief, no, na Sabah really belongs to the Sultanate of Sulu, and that ito na yung kabayaran sa lahat ng injustices na tiniis ng people of Sulu. And they will get the 14.9 billion. So we can do something for Sulu. So we can help in Sulu. Well, at least, no, kung yung share ko lang. Kasi I cannot speak, no, for the entire administrators and heirs. Basta ako, I know what to do.
To get what they were supposedly owed, the so-called heirs to the Sulu Sultanate set their sights on Petronas, Malaysia's state-owned oil and gas company. In July of 2022, assets belonging to Petronas were seized by bailiffs representing the claimants. When news of the seizure broke, parliamentarians from East Malaysia were up in arms.
Yearly payment made even during BN time, we also kami tidak aware. So that's why bila benda ni keluar, we were shocked that there was a payment given to Sulu.
There was a risk that assets belonging to other Malaysian entities around the world could be seized. Putrajaya quickly appealed the ruling.
The Malaysian government has already filed the appeal in the French courts. They have stayed the judgment, means they've suspended the Stampa judgment, and now they're trying to set aside the whole February 2022 judgment. And Stampa's arbitration decision has been challenged, and in both the Spanish and French superior courts, his appointment has been found to be null and void, and so that the arbitration award should not be executed.
Bagi saya sendiri, saya berpandangan bahwa yang kita katakan waris Sultan Sulu ini pun kita sudah tidak tahu yang mana satu. Sudah berapa generasi. Siapa sebenarnya yang betul-betul berhak untuk kita bawa untuk berunding. Pertama. Keduanya, kerajaan Filipina sendiri pun tidak mengiktiraf wujudnya lagi kesultanan Sulu. So, saya rasa dia sudah tidak ada lokal standby untuk membuat apa-apa tuntutan pun.
The courts in Europe appear to agree. In a press statement released by the Prime Minister's Department on February 2nd, the Spanish courts have rejected the claimant's appeal, while the French and Luxembourg courts have set aside the award.
So it's really a small issue of compensation that has been really blown up because there is this two actors, both the claimants and the arbitrator, that I think is trying to pressure the Malaysian government into paying more than they ought to pay.
For now, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has distanced himself from the dispute. His administration claims it is a private matter between Sulu and Malaysia. But a former governor of Tawi-Tawi could place the issue into the president's crosshairs. Almarim Tilla has been recently appointed as the presidential advisor on Muslim affairs.
This is one of the issues I'll take up with him. Not only because I come from Sulu, but I used to be the advisor, and up to now, of the Sultanate of Sulu and North Borneo, which is now headed by Sultan Pugdalon Kiram, who is in Holo, and he gets in touch with me very often. Wala pang initiative yata, no? I should know, but President Bon, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., is conversant with this issue. And he knows that the heirs of the Sultanate of Sulu has a legitimate legal claim to Sabah.
Marcos has, in the past, before becoming an elected president, talked about, Sabah being historically linked to the Philippines, but has not gone out of his way to begin that conversation just yet.
The moral questions in the Sulu Sultanate are like ping pong balls, in this some kind of a geopolitical game between the two countries. The Sulu Sultanate and its people have been put in a disadvantaged situation for years, for decades and even centuries. Therefore, both the Philippines and Malaysia should be parties in sort of recognizing historical injustice committed to these people.
But for some in Sulu, like Alexander, the arbitration is a distraction. To him, it was never about the money.
Yun na nga, yung meeting namin yung isang linggo, sinabi ko sa kanila, aanhin natin ang pera kung hindi natin makuha ang lugar. Oo, ang pera, bigyan mo kami, ilan lang. Ang gusto namin, lugar. Die hard sa Sultanate of Sulu kasi lugar talaga. Kasi ang sabi ng kanunuan namin at saka nila, ang lugar sa amin. Sa mga kanunuan namin.
Now that the court case appears settled in Malaysia's favor, there are corners of disquiet among the followers of the Sulu Sultanate. If tensions flare up again, Filipino migrants living in Malaysia's easternmost state could be caught in the crosshairs. "43-year-old filmmaker Harold Regan Aswa lives in Kota Kinabalu, the capital of Sabah. In 2021, he set out to make a documentary about the Lahad Datu-standoff.
I was given the task of making a film about the Tanduo insurgents. So I guess I accepted the challenge, thinking that I know this issue. And when I started Googling, I realized there's a lot of things that I don't understand, even in my own state.
But when he traveled to East Sabah to begin filming, he found himself tailed by security forces.
I got very confused. Why are we being photographed like this? Why are we being chased like that? I guess I can say it's the local authorities are trying their best to keep it safe. And I'm not really annoyed by what happened.
The Lahad Datu-standoff has had a profound impact on this part of Sabah in the 10 years since. For one, the security presence has increased significantly. The East Sabah Security Command, or ESCOM, was established in the wake of the incursion, a joint task force of the military, police, and Coast Guard. Between 2018 and 2020, it thwarted 40 kidnappings in the East Sabah security zone.
The result of the incursion, of course, has meant that, a mega ESCOM headquarters is now built in Lahad Datu as a sort of monitoring device, but also auxiliary ships, military ships, frequent those waters more often than they used to.
And the presence of ESCOM, it gives you this feeling, it makes you feel like it's a safe place lah. But it also feels like everything is being watched. Everything is being, there's CCTV everywhere lah. Overall, the people that we saw in Lahad Datu, the people that we approach, they have some kind of reluctant, they don't want to tell their stories.
Some of the people Harold spoke to are from the stateless community living in Sabah. Most are of Filipino descent, having made their way to eastern Malaysia since the 1960s. But since the Lahad Datu-standoff, they are viewed with more suspicion than before. Dr. Vilashini had written a book about Malaysia's uneasy relationship with this community.
If you're asking me how many undocumented, stateless, irregular individuals of Philippines descent there are in Sabah, your guess is as good as mine. We've been floated with numbers from the Malaysian government as low as 500,000. We've also had numbers as high as like 2 million from NGOs or the civil society groups as well. And then of course there are other people who look for a safe estimate between about 700,000 or so. Election season comes around, the first people to sort of be of target are the migrant communities. And for a period of time, I do remember, people of Suluk descent very careful with the way in which they told other people that they were Suluk, right? Especially if they met people from out of town, other Sabahans from other parts of Sabah.
Following the Lahad Datu-standoff, Malaysian authorities stepped up the deportation of Filipino migrants. According to Bernama, the news agency of the Malaysian government, over 70,000 Filipinos were deported in the 5 years between 2013 and 2018. In 2022, more than 2,000 were deported. One reason? To root out Sulu spies who may be mingling among the stateless communities.
Deportation is only framed as a security issue. If we let these criminals or thugs or potential spies or potential infiltrators out, we're going to repeat 2013 again. And I can understand, I don't condone it, but I can understand why sovereign states choose to do that. For them, the security and the protection of their citizens is a major responsibility on their part.
But the deportation of stateless migrants from Sabah is a complex issue. Some have lived here for generations, having never set foot on Filipino soil. When Insight visited the stateless community in Sabah a year ago, they spoke of their sense of displacement.
Macam anak saya, dia sudah lahir sini, jadi dia bukan datang di sini pendatang haram. Itu mustahil, itu bagi dia orang warga negara apa, kerajaan sini memang itu soalannya agak dia orang pun boleh senyum kalau kau soal begitu. Saya mau ada warga negara, dia boleh ketawa sendiri itu. Kau orang asing, kau minta itu terus warga negara. Tapi sekurang-kurangnya, kalau dia orang tidak bagi sudah warga negara kan, cobalah dia orang iktiraf sejak dia sebagai manusia yang dia boleh bekerja, yang dia boleh meneruskan hidup. Jadi memang itulah, memang sangat susah lah. Mau cakap saya saja yang tahu apa yang saya rasa. Saya saja yang tahu, orang lain tiada yang tahu.
When we do think about people of Philippines descent, there's a sort of identity that we think that they embody. But with generations and generations have passed and new generations coming out from that community, they look less and less of what you think or sound less and less of what you think a Filipino is or a Filipina is, and more like your everyday Sabahan. We're going to have a problem with dividing the community because Sabah is incredibly biracial, multiracial, what have you.
Saya berpandangan ada pro and cons mengenai kehadiran mereka di sini. Mungkin bagi yang kita panggil sebagai stateless, mereka ini sudah berada di sini dan asas mereka datang ke sini adalah sebagai pelarian perang. Tapi masalah itu harus dilihat dari segi peluang untuk kita melakukan sesuatu. Sebagai contoh, kehadiran mereka di sini mungkin boleh kita jadikan sebagai kita punya sumber tenaga kerja, ataupun kita punya consumer yang akan membeli barang-barang buatan ataupun barang-barang runcit. Cuma ia perlu diurus dengan cara yang baik.
Also at stake is the small but significant trade between Sabah and Sulu. There is high demand for imported goods from Malaysia in the Sulu archipelago. For example, in Tawi-Tawi, before the pandemic, almost 90% of the rice, sugar, and cooking oil came from Sabah.
Ito lahat ito galing Malaysia. Ito mga biscuit to, chocolate, to, ganito. Galing to Malaysia. Product to galing Malaysia.
Aida Sangkula Tutu is a trader from Holo. Since the 1990s, she has been buying goods from Sabah and selling them in the Sulu archipelago.
Yung 2013, nahirapan ako sa pagpunta ng Malaysia dahil sa may konting conflict ng Malaysian government at saka sa aming lugar na sa Holo na hindi na tayo hindi na ba tayo makapagbasta-basta mag-ano doon. Dapat talaga mayroon tayong mga document na ipaano sa government ng Malaysia. Kapag nagkaroon ng kaguluhan, yung Sabah at saka Holo, siyempre, mahigpit sila sa ng transportation, sa pamimili ng mga paninda namin. Yung ko ngayon, sana magkasundo na magbayad na sila ng rental nila sa Sulu sa Philippines. Dapat talaga magbayad kasi hindi sila yung may-ari. Ang may-ari yung mga ninuno ng mga taga Sulu. Hindi lang Kiram. Lahat ng taga Sulu may-ari ng Sabah, Malaysia.
With the arbitration case and the eye-watering award making headlines, the disputed status of Sabah has once again been brought to the fore. It has stirred up passions over a sense of place, passions that run deeply through Malaysians and the people of Sulu.
Ako, as a Tausug, I consider myself as a Filipino. Of course, we consider ourselves as Filipino. Because we are Filipino, we're using Filipino passport, we're using Filipino currency, and we abide by the Philippine law. It's the role of every government to look after the interests of their constituents. Ilang presidente na ang dumaan. Since the birth of Malaysia, we want to talk about our claim over Sabah. Hanggang sa ilang presidente na ng Pilipinas ang dumating at umalis, natapos ang term, wala pa rin nangyayari.
Dia cuma ibarat macam kanak-kanak mau minta gula-gula daripada ibu dia. Kita tahu yang dikatakan Kesultanan Sulu ni dia tidak ada apa-apa strength pun, tidak ada kekuatan. Jadi bagaimana mereka boleh melakukan sesuatu yang kita anggap sebagai pencerobohan ke kedaulatan kita.
May kasabihan nga na kung hindi makuha yung lugar, kung mamatay kami, hindi kami makapasok sa heaven. Kung may time, may dumala sa amin doon, lalaban din kami uli. Hanggang mabalik sa amin yung lugar ng Sabah. Kahit ilang beses, handa kaming lumaban uli. Malaki pang gulo kung uulitin. Malaki pa sa una ang gulo.